He's an aviation specialist and has run a number of airlines. And of course, there is the rest of the ExCo that is in support of Zooks. As I said, we've begun a domestic and a global search for the new CEO, and what things we are now focusing on in terms of the strength in the company is number one, to strengthen the executive so that we are able to run and deal with the operational side in the company. And to that end, we have made appointments. These appointments have been in the pipeline, going through various iterations in terms of the processes that they need to go through. We can confirm today that we have made an appointment for the CEO at SAT, our technical side, South African Airways Technical, in the name of Mr. Adam Voss. And we have made an offer for the Mango CEO. We're waiting for him to sign, and we're hoping that he'll be able to join the company as soon as is possible. The other positions at executive levels are at at an advanced stage, and we'll come back to the market to inform with respect to those. What the shareholder and the board have been doing is to interrogate and exercise and review all the aviation assets of the country, of the state. And to that end, that will go towards beefing up what we have been running with in terms of the turnaround strategy. So a lot of conversations and discussions are ongoing in that respect. With respect, just at the top level, without getting into the detail, which, as I've said, will be dealt with by Martin and Agda in question time, the shareholder representative, Department of Public Enterprises, and National Treasury are very involved and have intensified engagements with the board and the executive in terms of finding solutions regarding the funding side of the organization. You will also be aware that the President convened a meeting of the CEOs of the state-owned entities earlier this week, again trying to find ways and means of enabling the SOEs so that they can deliver on the mandate that they have in terms of advancing and developing the economy of the country. The board and the executive met with the unions this morning. We started by meeting with the executives so that we could inform them about the appointment of Zooks into the acting CEO position. We then met with the unions before this meeting, again to engage them and inform them and emphasize the importance of support so that we all work as one. After this meeting, we shall be meeting with the rest of the staff body so that everyone is ad idem in terms of where the organization is going, who is in the leadership position. We don't want the sense of vacuum to perpetuate. And given the fact that we are committed as a board to transparency and ongoing feedback to the market, as processes develop and evolve, we shall be convening other meetings such as this one so that we can give ongoing feedback. We realize as SAA board that perhaps we have not always been forthcoming with information, and we do need to close the gap so that there is a proper understanding in the market and by you as an important stakeholder of what is actually happening, because SAA is a national asset. With those words, I would like to then move on to reading the press statement titled Leadership Stability at SAA Strengthened with New Appointments. Board of South African Airways is pleased to announce the appointment of Ms. Zux Ramasia as the Acting Chief Executive Officer for SAA as from Monday, because the outgoing CEO's last day in office is Monday, the 10th of June, as per the agreement with the board. The board has commenced a search domestically and globally for a permanent CEO with appropriate experience and expertise to stabilize the company and to oversee the implementation of the long-term turnaround strategy. As a consequence of the change in leadership, Mr. Vuyani Jarana will no longer serve as CEO of SAA as from end of day on Monday, but will avail himself to provide transitional support and hand over processes to the board and management when so required for the duration of his notice period, which goes on until the end of August. Ms. Ramasia, who is currently General Manager for Operations, is an experienced executive with extensive aviation background. She will be supported by an experienced executive committee, including, as I've said, Mr. Peter Davis and Mr. Dion Fredericks. With the support of the shareholder, the board and executive management of SAA are fully committed to the turnaround strategy. What we've been saying to our employees is the transformation of SAA to profitability continues, as has been the case while the outgoing CEO was in place, as well as even before, because the turnaround strategy predates the outgoing CEO. In that regard, we are working closely with the shareholder to optimize the aviation assets of the state. The board is also taking steps to strengthen the executive capacity in the group. I've already mentioned some of the appointments that we were already making. The board let me read as it is. We have appointed Adam Voss as the new CEO of South African Airways Technical, and we are finalizing the appointment of a permanent CEO for Mango. We are close to concluding other senior appointments and will make further announcements in due course. That is a quote from the chairman, Mr. Magwaza. The board acknowledges the critical financial circumstances confronting the company and is in ongoing discussions with the Department of Public Enterprises, National Treasury, and financial institutions with respect to putting in place a financial structure appropriate to support the long-term sustainability of the company. The board and the executive management met this morning with the labor unions to provide assurances that the turnaround strategy remains on track and will continue to involve all key stakeholders in rolling out the implementation of the said strategy. In conclusion, the board is committed to transparency and engaging with all stakeholders regarding stabilizing SAA and the implementation of the long-term strategy. We will be providing regular updates on progress. Again, that's a quote from Mr. Magwaza. And as I conclude, I think it's important to mention that there is a team that has been surrounding the CEO. It has not been a one-man show. So while we are very sad that he has left, the reality is that the work that he was busy championing and leading will not collapse. We've got the assurance from the executives, we've got the assurance from the unions, and as a board, we are committed to ensuring that we support the executives in what they are trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to immediately switch into the interactive session where members of the media will have an opportunity to put questions to the panel here, the chairperson of the board will exercise discretion as to who should respond to which question, unless a question comes out pointedly indicating that it is directed to any specific member of the panel. As we all know by now, which is also common cause, rules of engagement. As you rise, putting up your question, you identify yourself, the media house you represent, and you put the question to the panel or two. My generosity at this point is that you will have more than one opportunity, 2 questions. Let's see how we behave with the first round of questions, given that we have time constraints. Based on best behavior, there may be a reward for a second round. So the reward system is in place. It is in our hands to ensure that we get the second round of questions. A quick announcement on logistics. The Q&A session is going to take place from that table. The elders are not going to shuttle between where they are seated and where I am. That means we are going to migrate the mics to the table. Let's do it in a smooth and clandestine way. You may proceed, sir. The second point, we are going to also share with you the media statement as well as the bios of the appointments, the individuals whose appointments have been announced today. So please don't feel restless that you do not have this information. Transparency dictates that we must share this with you. Hence the invitation over here. I am trying to make use of this time to enable the migration of these tools. In the meantime, it doesn't look like there's a lot of trust and cooperation and collaboration amongst members of the media. Each one of them wants to hold individually their own mic. I don't know if this means the stakes are high, that they are entertaining a possibility of some underhandedness insofar as the transmission of sound is concerned. All the same, we'll leave it to their comfort, and as soon as they indicate that they are ready, then we will start. Perhaps by show of hands, let me see if there is any appetite. I am going to start from my right. From my right. Ultra right, not political. I'll start with you, sir. You'll be my number 1. My lady, you'll be number 2. You'll be number 3, 4, and number 5 for now. Please, let's keep it that way. Don't ask me who's number 1. Remember, that is the order. And please be succinct. Up to 2 questions for now. Let's see how we behave on that. You may start, sir.
Good morning. My name is Rema Saka from Daily Maverick.
My 2 questions are just about the financial position of SAA. My understanding is that there's about 4 billion rand that will mature in loans, that is by July. Can you please just talk to us about whether SAA will make those payments? My second question is also about the financial position. Can you please tell us what is your engagements with banks about them extending further credit lines to SAA, considering that there is this loan that is due in July, according to my understanding? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Number 2. Number 2.
Well, number 1. Hi, Jacques from ENCA. I have 2 questions. The first one is, Mr. Jarana was supposed to serve until the end of August, and you've mentioned that his last day will be end of business on Monday. Why is that? Could you please elaborate? Secondly, the unions have indicated that they will down tools if his resignation is not rescinded. What are the plans around that? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 3, yes.
Morning. This is Sabelo Skiti from the Canadian Guardian. My questions, the first one was related to the financials. I think it's covered. But I would just like whoever responds to touch on the issue of going concern status. Less than 2 years ago, SAA found itself in a position where it nearly lost the route in Hong Kong because of the issue of financials. Where are we on the outstanding financials from the previous financial year? And are we ready for the audit for this year? Secondly, in Mr. Jarana's letter, the second one, not the resignation letter, he mentioned a meeting that was at Rothschild's offices on Monday. He called it a board meeting. Subsequent media reports have also alluded to the fact that it could have been a meeting with Rothschild's as a funder. Could the airline possibly clear that up for us?
Thank you very much. Before I move on to the next report, I was going to put questions. Colleagues, I know we can be creative and smart. It is 2 questions. So there's not going to be question 1 and 1.1, 2 and 2.2, and that it is 2. It is question 1 and question 2. Simple counting 1 and 2. Sabelo.
Amina Akram, SABC News Business Division. Just very quickly, I'm not getting a sense that, this is going to, especially for the business community and the markets, maybe are you going to have a meeting with them? It doesn't come across as, this change of leadership, and SA has not made any profit since 2011. Maybe just walk the business community into your confidence as to, what in terms of going forward and whether this is the right thing to do. I'm not sensing that the markets will walk with you in this announcement. I don't know.
Thank you.
Terence Cream, Engineer News. Just on the financial structure mentioned in the press statement, could you unpack that? Could you give a time frame for when that's going to be in place? And could you say whether it involves a National Treasury injection? That's question 1. Second, a big issue around the delineation of roles between the shareholder, the board and the executive. Can you say how that has been clarified during this period, at least for the period of the acting CEO? Thank you.
Thank you. Chairperson and the members of the panel.
May I suggest that, can you hear me? Okay. May I suggest that we take the financial questions, they will be dealt with by Martin Kingston, the acting CEO, CFO, I say it again, the acting CFO, Dion Fredericks. Then after, maybe you can talk about the going concern issue. Thank you. And then the issues regarding the CEO, my spokesperson here, our spokesperson, Mr. Mkotuso, will deal with that. Because generally in terms of themes, that's where the questions are sitting.
Okay, all right, let me start with the financial questions. Many of them are on the same subject, so let me elaborate. We have term loans of 9.2 billion rand, and we have a short-term loan of 3.5 billion rand. They are both scheduled to mature imminently. We are in discussions with the banks about extending those loans, and we are confident that the banks are prepared so to do. The condition for so doing is that they have some level of comfort and visibility on accessing capital from the shareholder. The shareholder in this case is National Treasury. I'll elaborate upon that shortly. And that the support from the shareholder will therefore enable not only the 3.5 billion to be retired, but working capital for the forthcoming year to be accessed. Mr. Musa will elaborate upon the fact that that is a requirement for us to be able to finalize our accounts on a going concern basis. We have been in very extensive and ongoing discussions with National Treasury and with the Department of Public Enterprises, not just over the last week. Obviously, those have intensified as a consequence of Mr. Jarana's resignation. They are fully sighted on, and aware of the need to put in place not only short-term financing, but in addition to that, to ensure that we have a sustainable balance sheet to be able to support and underpin the turnaround strategy. We're all very well aware of the fact, both as a board and I think the stakeholder community more broadly, that if we don't put SAA on a stable financial footing, we're going to continue to have exactly the challenges that we've experienced over the past several years. The long-term strategy is predicated upon having adequate working capital support to see us through to when we expect to see profits coming through, which is in 21-22, as we've indicated consistently over the past year. I think that probably answers all of the questions. I should probably add that we are in ongoing discussions, and Dion, you may want to elaborate as appropriate, with all of the lenders. We have taken them into our confidence, not only with respect to the details of the strategy, but more importantly, the discussions that we're having with our shareholder to ensure that we can operate and walk in lockstep as we navigate what is obviously a very difficult financial set of circumstances.
Just to confirm what Martin has indicated, significant discussions have been had with various lenders, current lender group. We've also been approached and have approached 3 other lender groups that have indicated they're interested in supporting us going forward. As you know, these are processes that's quite sensitive as well as time consuming. Our current lender group has extended our loans. We're in discussions to further extend that. But also to give this, one need to look at it in 2 buckets. Firstly, short-term in terms of the working capital, but also to get the balance sheet structure right in a long-term perspective. And that will make sure ultimately that we have certainty, and based on that, be able to implement the turnaround plan.
Martin wants to say something to complete what you
Let me just answer the question with respect to the SABC issue about the views of the business community and markets. We're well aware of the fact that SAA, not only as a national carrier but as a state-owned enterprise, is a lightning rod in respect of confidence levels with respect to the economy more broadly and indeed state-owned enterprises. And we're very mindful of the fact that we need to conduct ourselves responsibly and that we need to put in place a commercially viable proposition that can serve the country on appropriate terms and conditions. We've had that discussion on an ongoing basis with the shareholder. When I say the shareholder, as I said, I don't just mean public enterprises, I mean National Treasury as well. I think that we are aligned entirely with them. When the chairman referred earlier on, as did Tandeka, to the need to review broad aviation policy that includes all the aviation assets under the control of the government, we're having a broad strategic discussion to ensure that we optimize them, to ensure that we have the most profitable possible airline industry to serve South Africa at large.
Maybe after you want to say something so that we complete the loop.
Mr. Chair, I think the matter around the funding, both Martin and Dion addressed, we have 9.2 billion of loans that are going to come up for repayment shortly, and the 3.5 billion facility. We've engaged the DBE and National Treasury. There's no reason for us to doubt that the 3.5 billion rand that is repayable shortly would be forthcoming. There is a process to follow, so that we need to engage the banks to extend the repayment date, and I think that's also on the go. If that matter is then satisfactorily resolved, we would then be able to go to the banks to raise an additional 4 billion rand of capital to see us through for the next period, and which will be consistent with our long-term turnaround strategy to restore the company to profitability, but we would need working capital. So our going concern status currently as it stands we're not able to submit the annual financial statements until such time as our going concern status is complete.
Maybe at this point, I would like Thandeka to take us through the issue of the CEO, as well as the issue of the meeting that we held at the board meeting we had at the Rothschild South Africa offices. And maybe Thandeka, in the process, you can also deal with the whole question of the leaks.
Thanks, Baba Makwaza. In terms of Mr. Jarana's letter of appointment, he has a 3-month notice period. And as we all know, a notice period can be served, or it may be served, it may not be served, depending on the discussions between the outgoing person and the company. In this instance, Mr. Jarana has requested at the, is it me?
Is this chair?
Can we use the roving mic? Thanks. In this instance, at the board meeting that we held at the boardrooms at Rothschilds, to which I will get back to on Monday, Mr. Jarana requested that, if possible, he be relieved of his responsibilities, that he should not have to serve the 3-month period. To which the board acceded, and we did not immediately indicate when he would exit. We said to him possibly until next week, Friday the 14th, because we were not in a space where we knew what the interim arrangements would be. We've worked through the interim arrangements, and with the consequence of the appointment of Zooks, and we could therefore get back to Mr. Jarana, which we have done, to indicate that beyond Monday the 10th, we will not need him to be executive at SAA. So it has been by mutual agreement that Mr. Jarana leaves before the 3-month period that is in his contract of employment. You want to add something?
No.
Oh, okay. And then let me then get to the meeting that was held at the Rothschilds boardroom. The reason the meeting was held at the Rothschilds boardroom by agreement from all board members was because of the leak that had happened over the weekend in terms of the letter of resignation that Mr. Jarana had submitted to the board. Because we were not sure, we were not certain where the leak had come from, we felt that let's move off the premises of SAA and move to a boardroom and office space that we know is regularly swept, and if there would be any untoward behavior that could be tracked very quickly. To that end, as a board, we have instituted an investigation of the leak. How did a leak happen with a document that was kept in a very secure space? We tried all manner of security to the extent that none of us as board members sitting here, except for the chairman, had a copy of the letter after the board meeting that we held on the 30th of May. Even the chairman himself will be part of the investigation of this leak, because all the letters that we read at the board meeting were taken back to him. So that is with respect to the leak and with respect to the decision by the board to then have the board meeting off-site to ensure that the information and the meeting proceedings were secure. And then I will end by commenting on the union strike. The the threatened union strike. What I'm aware of is that members of 2 unions have indicated that they will have a march, not a strike, on Tuesday. And they have all the permissions, and it will follow the rules that are known and that are as per the agreements in the event of such an action. We've just had an interaction with the unions, as I said, and they did add their views. There is disagreement amongst the unions with respect to what needs to be said. The one union group wants Mr. Jarana back. The other union group says, thanks, he's gone. We take all the views, and that is the reality at SAA. Thank you. I wanted to add.
There was also a question on the
confidence, on the issue of confidence, and it was implied in the opening remarks that there's a process of engagement with a number of stakeholders, both internal and external. I don't know if there's anything more to say on that. Through you, Chair.
Before the Chair takes the mic, there was also a question around shareholder board and executive interactions. If I may address that, obviously we have an oversight responsibility as the board of SAA, and in doing so we work very closely with the executive, and we carry a fiduciary responsibility, and we carry, as you all know, our heads are on the blocks, whether our executive or not, should anything happen. That therefore necessitates that we apply our minds in everything that happens within the company. If we have questions, it is within our sphere to dig deeper so that we can understand the documents and all the information that the executives are bringing to us, lest we make decisions on flimsy basis. So that is very clearly articulated, and I think the Companies Act is quite clear on that. And the shareholder and the board, again, the DPE is the shareholder ministry, and we've got interactions with DPE, and that is a relationship that's ongoing. It has intensified given the challenges that Martin and Dion Achter have all alluded to and that you are aware of with respect to the financial health of the organization. And that those interactions are going to continue deepening as we deal with the matter of the aviation capabilities of the state, because that necessitates that there is an understanding of the macro strategy from government and where the place of SAA, Mango, and the other assets fits in with that. Thank you.
Just to answer the question on the audit has started for 2019, so just to put that to bed as well.
Maybe let me reiterate our position with regards to Mr. Jarana. We had a lot of confidence in Mr. Jarana's capacity to be able to drive the strategy to fruition. We did the best we could as a board to support him. Maybe the support we gave him was not enough for him, which is why when he tendered his resignation, the board was shocked. I was not shocked because I was staying very close to Mr. Jarana, and we did try to say to him, can you stay? And he indicated that no. We are concerned that he left, and we are hoping that we're going to build a stable environment in which any coming chief executive will not find the environment that he might feel is not supportive of him as such.
Thank you, Chair. We are moving to the next round. I am going to start from here, move to the left, or ultra left. The gentleman in front here. My lady will be number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and number 6. In that order, up to 2 questions. It's not compulsory that you ask 2 questions. Even 1 is okay.
Kalani Bajwa at Power 98.7. Yes, 2 questions. The first one, are the discussions that we are having right now have anything to do with a possible equity partner? And how far, can you tell us something about those discussions? And secondly, the Free Market Foundation made an application this week for the Public Access to Information Act for access to your financial records and SA Express as well, with the rumors that there is a possible merger between the two. How is your response going to be? I know you just may have received the PI application, but it concerns your finances because you have not released your financial statements. Thank you.
Hi, Mobile from Reuters News. 2 questions. One, in terms of hiring a permanent CEO, will you be looking externally or internally, and what kind of qualifications or capabilities will you be looking for? 2, in Mr. Jarana's letter, he raised a number of concerns regarding lack of funding and too much bureaucracy as hindering the implementation of the turnaround strategy. Do you agree with him when he raised these concerns? And are you certain that the turnaround strategy will be implemented? Because he said that it won't be achievable.
Hi, Khomotso Modise from Eyewitness News. I just had a question on, I understand that you had spoken about consulting the unions on a variety of issues. One of those being the appointment of the interim CEO. And I'm just remembering that in 2016, SAA had been one of the unions that had flagged her for some concerns in terms of operations. Is SAA one of the unions that you've consulted? What is their stance on this? And did you guys look into those concerns, into those allegations before the appointment?
Good day, my name is Kabelo Kumalo from Business Report. Your presentation so far is confusing, at least from my side, because in the statement you released on Sunday, Mr. Magwaza is quoted as saying that Mr. Jarana had committed to serve out his notice until August. But now today you tell us that no, he decided no, I might as well leave immediately. What happened between Sunday and Monday where you had the infamous meeting? Is it his immediate departure because you suspect that he's the one who leaked the letter? And secondly, it's like you are shielding the shareholder in this instance, because Mr. Jarana is clear that there was no shareholder support. And Mr. Metandeka is correct to say that the strategy predated Mr. Jarana's appointment. Why are then today we are still talking about discussions between Treasury and DP and yourself? Clearly there's no shareholder support. Why can't you just concede that? Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, Loni from Bloomberg. I think Morton said that the airline plans to break even 2021. Am I too close? Oh, okay, sorry. Could I ask, what is the airline currently operating at? What is it? I'm guessing it's operating at a loss, but what are those losses at the moment? And we talked about talking to 3 new lenders. Are we talking international lenders or local lenders? And there's been lots of talks that you guys are in advanced sort of discussions with the Bank of China. Is that in fact a reality? And just to reiterate on the first question, if any of these funders or lenders come to the table with quite a big chunk of funding, would you consider giving them equity in exchange for that funding? Thank you.
Hi, Liola Mkindane from Business Day. Just a quick one on the turnaround strategy. I just want to check if the board still believes that the funding requirement for the strategy is 21 billion, or can we expect that figure to go up or go down? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take response or comments from the panel on that, and we may consider the last round with those interested in asking questions having an opportunity to ask only one question, please. Thank you. Chair.
Okay, let me start again with the financial questions, if I may, and Dion, I may ask you to supplement in due course. With respect to a potential equity partner, of course that's the decision of the shareholder, not of the board or the company. But it's clear that at an appropriate stage it may be appropriate to consider forms of partnership, and that will certainly inform, inter alia, the broader discussion that the board is already having and the company with the shareholder about the state of the aviation assets of the state. We can elaborate upon that if you like. The same applies to any possible merger that has been mooted with SA Express. Obviously, the shareholder needs to consider the optimization of the assets under their control and authority. We as a board need to consider the ramifications for the company, for SAA and its assets. We'll have due regard to the strategy, to the financial status of both companies independently, or any other partner that might be introduced into the equation. I should emphasize that these are very long-term processes. They don't happen overnight, not just the consideration, but also the implementation. There are major regulatory considerations, including competition considerations, that need to be considered, along with the broader socio-economic issues that we would need to apply our mind to. We are currently operating at a loss. I think that is in the public domain. That is the background to the request that we have made for 4 billion rand of support for the current financial year. I indicated that we anticipate that we'll be making a profit in the year 21-22. We're still on track to do that. There's absolutely nothing that has changed as a consequence of the departure of Mr. Jarana. The long-term turnaround strategy, which was approved by the board and indeed approved by the shareholder, remains on track and indeed is beginning to bear fruit in a number of respects, and I know that Mr. Jarana has regularly updated the media on progress that has been made in that regard. Nothing changes. With respect to the lenders that we're talking about, I don't think that we want to be specific about the identity of the lenders. These are lenders over and beyond those that are already in the lending group, that are well known to everybody. They're in the public domain. They do include international lenders. There is no scope for any international lender at this stage to ask for any equity participation. This would be loan funding, conventional loan funding on a term basis or on a short-term basis. I don't know, Dion, whether you want to elaborate. Have you covered? I think I've covered all of the questions relating to finance and strategy, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I will deal with the question from Eyewitness News. I think it would be irresponsible of the board if we were to take what one union says and use that as a criterion for whether we appoint or not appoint. It's an important input to the discussion. We're not consulting with the unions this morning. We were sharing information with the unions so that they know what is happening in their company. We were sharing with them the appointment of Zooks, and none of the unions in that room, and all SAA unions were represented, raised a question about Zooks' competence or suitability for the position. Then there was a question from a business report regarding why, when the statement on Sunday had indicated that Mr. Jarana will serve his 3-month notice, and then on Monday that had changed. What changed was the conversation the board, or the discussions that the board had with Mr. Jarana on Monday. Mr. Jarana came to the meeting at Rothschild's because there were operational issues that needed to be dealt with, and his input was important. We then dealt with receipt of his letter of resignation, where we informed him that we accepted, and he then requested to be let off sooner than the 3 months notice. And after the board applied its mind, we acceded to his request. And so that is what it is. And there is a question about shareholder support. We interface with the shareholder at a number of levels. On the funding space, Martin, Dion, and Achta have explained that. We interface with the shareholder with respect to the turnaround strategy. And as we said, we would be having discussions with them. We'll be having discussions with them, which, by the way, was started inside the organization. The first presentation on this matter was made by Mr. Jarana. So we're continuing the work that has already been happening. So we interface with the shareholder at different levels. And we do know that if we say the shareholder is not supporting us, there is an understanding of the context. South Africa doesn't have money, the fiscus. Number two, we're not the only SOE that requires funding. Therefore, we are very aware of the fact that there will be prioritization and reprioritization. We may not get everything that we want. With respect to moving forward with appointments, because there needs to be concurrence with some of the appointments, we get those. Sometimes, yes, there might be a slight delay, but we get those. We've just announced those. And I would not say that as a principle, there is no support from the shareholder. Thank you.
Maybe Martin can also elaborate on the whole issue of stakeholders so that we can really have a proper grasp of what is happening in that space, Martin.
So we're very well aware of the fact that there are multiple stakeholders that we need to consider in this equation, not just the financial community, but obviously our customers, our staff, our suppliers. And we need to treat them all in terms of equity. We need to treat them equally in terms of appropriate provision of information. We're not going to prefer the provision of information. What is critical at this moment in time is that we demonstrate the ability to stabilize any uncertainty, which I think we are doing today. In terms of the management, the only change that's been made is that Zux is replacing Mr. Jarana for the interim until we find a permanent CEO. There was a question that I think I should answer. We will look both internally and externally to be a comprehensive search. It's already commenced, and we'll try and expedite it under the circumstances. That will be informed in part by the shape of the strategy and the state at which we're at going forwards, but the work commences forthwith. Finally, there was a question about the Free Market Foundation. They can have the same access to the financial records as any other member of the public is entitled to, and Mr. Musa has already indicated that in the case of SAA, we'll publish our accounts as soon as we're able to do so once we've confirmed the going concern status.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, one last opportunity. Let's start from that side. Yes, gentleman at the back there.
CNBC Africa. Mr. Jarana cited in his letter that he didn't feel he had enough clarity about funding, shareholder support, and some of the decisions actually being taken. My question is, has essentially anything changed if Mr. Kingston is saying that the long-term strategy is still on track and enjoys shareholder support? That long-term strategy was supposed to turn around the airline in 2021. Surely, it cannot be on track if the former incumbent is leaving for that reason. So, can we have a concession from the board that we need to readjust all of the things that have been said, the long-term strategy, when it will, or most likely to succeed? Can we just have a concession that things are not as well as, well, they're being presented here?
Thank you. There was a hand again here.
I'm Catherine from Travel News Weekly. With your GM of operations moving into the CEO role for this interim position, do you have a plan in place to ensure that operations won't be affected for your passengers and the travel trade?
Next question. Yes, that gentleman. Yes.
Kabelo Kumar again from Business Report. My question now is related to the Mango CEO position. Because your job advertisement for that position says a minimum requirement should be at least metric. Why in 2019 do we still have what CEO with just a metric?
Thank you very much. Is there any interest this side? There is. I'm not saying you should declare your interest here. Dwayne?
Terence Creamer again. Just in terms of, I'm very slow in terms of this financial structure. But from what I understand, is you say you want to retire 3.5 billion, which is coming due now. Can we assume that you don't have the money to retire that without the Treasury taking on that? Secondly, you want to now get 4 billion for the year for working capital. We assume that that will be the existing lender pool, and these 3 new lender pool that will give you that. And then thirdly, there's the 9.2 billion, which we assume you want to extend under new terms. Is that the structure? Have I got that correct in my mind? And please could you give me a time frame for when that structure will be in place? I think the key question is the Treasury going to have to take on the 3.5 billion retirement? Thanks.
Let's not follow the trend. One means one, singular.
I'm not sure if I just missed the answer, but Reuters asked about the reasons cited in Jarana's resignation letter about bureaucratic processes and interference. I'm not sure if it was answered. If it was, sorry, I didn't hear the answer. If you could just elaborate on that as well, thanks.
Thank you. My question is similar to that, but I think it's directly for the chairperson. Chair, the main issue, I think if you read Mr. Jarana's letter carefully, is a frustration, I think, on his part, largely with the fact that what he wanted to implement could not be done because the shareholder and the board were standing in front of him. Now, the understanding behind that is that he's speaking basically about red tape. He's said this before. I don't know if maybe it's not an appreciation for the PFMA or what the issues are, but obviously there's that. There's been issues between Mr. Jarana and certain of the board about this before, about the same issue. Where it got quite tumultuous, we understand that Minister Kodane had to intervene as the shareholder and sort of talk Mr. Jarana down. So what if one then keeps that in mind, then one says this thing could have been foreseen. And I'm only saying that because of the impact it has had in terms of the perception of stability at SAA, the perception of stability within the SOE sector, and what ratings agencies and what investors will say about the state of SOEs in the country in general. Why is it that nothing really was done by SAA leadership, either to make sure that Mr. Jarana gets on side with regards to what processes must be followed when you are implementing your turnaround strategy, or to lobby government to relax what Mr. Jarana needed to be relaxed to implement this turnaround strategy? It seems as if the board was sitting on a ticking time bomb and didn't act on anything up until Mr. Jarana, tendered his resignation.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
It's Ray from Daily Maverick again. There was a question asked earlier on about the cost of the long-term strategy, but it wasn't addressed. Mr. Jarana's own estimations was that the long-term turnaround strategy would cost about 22 billion rand over the next 3 years. I'm just wondering, with him leaving now, is that estimation still correct, or has it been adjusted? Thanks.
Thank you. Chair.
Maybe if I could start, because there was a question really that directed at me with regards to Mr. Jarana's departure. Mr. Jarana is entitled to his views, his perceptions, and his conclusions. we respect that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we completely agree with those. The board has its own views. I'm sure the shareholder has his views about the reasons. He's entitled to these reasons. Mr. Jarana was a valued member of SAA, was respected by all the stakeholders internally, and I also get a sense from all the media pronouncements that Mr. Jarana was supported and respected from outside. And we would like to leave it at that. He was making a serious contribution which we recognized, but he made a decision to leave at this point. Thank you.
Okay, let me start with the Daily Maverick question first, because it'll cover, I think, Terence, your question as well. The 22 billion is not the cost of the LTTS. The 22 billion is actually 21.7 billion is the amount of outstanding debt. If you look at the 9.2 plus the 3.5 plus the 4 plus the 5 that we've already received, that gives you the 21.7. It is clear that SAA has unsustainable levels of debt on its balance sheet. It's not just clear to the board, it's clear to the shareholder, it's clear to the lenders. The lenders, if they're going to advance further capital, need to be assured of the fact that their existing exposure, if it is restructured, is repaid when it is supposed to be repaid. At the moment, the 3.5 and the 9.2, I'll explain the 9.2 is a longer term loan, the 3.5 was a bridge facility, full due to be repaid at the end of July. We are in discussions with the lenders about repaying the 3.5 and extending the 9.2 over a protracted period of time. Repaying the 3.5 opens the door for us to access additional liquidity for the current financial year. That is the 4 that I have spoken about. That takes us into, and Karabo, you've asked the question, that takes us into the financial year 21-22. That is when we expect to turn a profit. The LTTS is currently anticipated to demonstrate that we can return to profitability after many years, as you know, in 21-22. That's assuming that there are no exogenous circumstances. There are many that are outside our control. Fuel price is one. Inflation is another. Currency exchange rates is a third. There are many that you'll be fully familiar with, don't impact either beneficially or adversely on our current business plan. We are, as I said before, in a discussion with the shareholder about how we can optimize that strategy, particularly looking at other assets of the state. I think that is the correct thing for this board and indeed for the shareholders to do, to ensure that we can return to profitability and offer the best possible service to our customer base, taking all of our stakeholders into account. I cannot speak for and on behalf of the shareholder or National Treasury, but I can assure you that they are seized with the need to ensure that there is adequate liquidity, both for the airline to operate and to give the banks the confidence that we can restructure the debt that is currently on the balance sheet. And when I say seized with the needs, we have had 4 meetings with them in the past week. I consider each and every one of those to have been a constructive meeting between the board and the shareholder, where National Treasury is fully involved and informed in the discussions that are taking place.
By the way, the shareholder is not only seized by the issues at SAA. Shareholder is seized with the issues in all the SOEs, and therefore he must balance his actions. We appreciate that. We might not like and enjoy the speed with which things are happening, but we understand why they take that long. Mr. Mkotoso is going to deal with this mango issue and matric in this century.
Before I get to that, let me deal with the arrangements regarding Zooks moving to the CEO, acting CEO position. we started those discussions, and Zooks is putting in place a process where she hands over. And she was actually holding two positions, her position in ops as well as assisting in communication. So those are the discussions that we're having right now, where we're looking at successors in terms of what has happened. What guarantee we can give Zooks is that the ball will not be dropped. We continue to strive for very positive and strong customer interfacing and ensuring that the safety of the airline is guaranteed. Thanks. And just on the bureaucratic processes, indeed we are an SOC, we're a state-owned company. There are rules that regulate how SOCs do business. So there will be bureaucracy. The PFMA, for instance, is quoted. The triple PFA is another piece of legislation, and a whole host of other pieces of legislation that SOEs, not just SAA, but all SOEs, all agencies of government and government itself, we have to adhere by those. So yes, there are bureaucratic processes. However, there are ways of maneuvering in terms of those bureaucratic processes. And yes, that maneuvering ends up delaying the speed at which the private sector works, the speed at which some of the decisions, because SAA is in a highly competitive space, so we maybe in a number of instances could be a step behind. However, given the close working relationship that we have structured with Shareholder, we are accelerating the decision making within the parameters of what legislation there is. So, and then let's deal with the Mango CEO. You would be aware that there are industries where people have come up the ranks, people have joined the business and moved up the ranks, and aviation is one such, logistics is one such, and a few others. And that they have metric and industry-specific training as well as experience. The metric as a formal qualification does not preclude them from applying. So basically, we realizing and knowing how our industry works, we did not want to exclude anybody. There are very many pilots who become CEOs and they do not have a tertiary qualification other than their pilot training and or their industry-specific training. So it is not untoward in the airline industry to find a CEO, to find senior executives that do not have the traditional academic qualification that may be needed in a highly technical environment, as in finance and others. So it's experience, it's demonstration, it's knowing the regulations, and obviously operating at the level that is requisite for a CEO. And that is the reason why we did not preclude people who may have been in the industry for a long time and have not subjected themselves to a university qualification or a tertiary qualification. And that is why the advert in the Mango process did not necessarily stipulate a university degree. If it were maybe someone who is fresh from high school, then that's a different story, because they don't have they would not have what it takes to run a business. Yeah, thank you. I think I have dealt with those. Yeah.
Maybe, Clary, if we can have a round of questions, if your time allows, because I would like to have those, and I would like to give to Martin as the chairman of the long-term turnaround strategy, because it's fundamental. It's the fulcrum on which we see it right now, so that he can really elaborate and tell us what's happening in that space. But maybe let's have Clary, any other questions?
We are truly indebted to you, Chair. We will start at the back, CNBCA, number 2. Mail and Guardian. Is there any other hand? Is there? These will be follow-up as I understand it. And power. In that order, please.
Shareholder Chapter CNBC Africa. I might have missed this, and if I have, I apologize. What is the current position with regards to the numerous acting positions, since we are already creating another acting position with the new CEO of Zooks? What is the board's plan with regards to addressing and getting permanent personnel in those areas? And I may be wrong, but I think it's your responsibility as a board to actually advocate to the shareholder. This thing that the shareholder's decision, whether or not we have an equity partner or the funding, it can't just be on the shareholder. Surely you have a responsibility as a board to advocate for something. You can advocate for an equity partner. Are you? Thank you.
I was just wondering on we say that basically SAA is not maybe the first priority when it comes to problems that the shareholder needs to address in terms of SOEs, right? Not the only, okay. So in that time that we are trying to implement the long-term strategy, is there any chance that some of SAA would have to go into administration while we are trying to implement that the long-term strategy? And what is the big bullets within that strategy that you guys think would actually turn SAA around to make some progress? Thanks.
Thank you. Power.
Sorry, I didn't seem to get a response with regards to the application by the Free Market Foundation on your finances. What your response is going to be. I know Mr. Kingston answered a lot of questions on finances, but on that particular application, please. Thank you.
Okay. You are referring to PIA application, Permission for Access to Free.
Sorry, Amina here again. Just very quickly, when you look at these turnaround strategies from the SOEs, there's a very strong element in the sense that cutting of the heads and cutting of the jobs seems to be one of the most fundamental issues or challenges that these CEOs that come in that probably are facing. Was it that perhaps you had loggerheads with the previous CEO over the turnaround strategy in terms of, I'm just asking, in terms of cutting down the jobs? I know government and the shareholders' policies is to keep these jobs, and we were also in a period where we were heading towards election. Maybe just give us a sense as to, was this not one of the issues as to why he left?
Madam Guardian.
Thanks. Just to get an understanding on the board's views on specifically airships and SAA technical. I know recently there have been quite a lot of discussions and thoughts around, do we get equity partners to come in there, do we sell them off wholesale? I think Martin, when he gives us, an update on the LTTS, if you could touch on that.
Thank you. ENCA. No further questions.
No, I actually have one.
You do.
Yeah. It might be okay, I'm just going to ask it. There was comments being made about how Jarana was asked to tone down his resignation letter, and then later on it was leaked. Did you guys ask him to tone down his resignation letter and say that he's ill, or rather wants to spend time with his family? Please could you just clarify on that? Thanks.
Do you have another question? No. Is the last question? The question on Satao Power?
The question on the new acting CEO. being Satao actually marching against her in 2015. Can you clarify your views? What happened to those concerns? Are you concerned about what had happened in the past? It's not the first time that she's been touted as a CEO. I think she previously lost out to Chris Bezuidenhout in the past. What kind of person are you looking for locally and abroad to actually take this position?
Okay. I take that was punctuated questions. That's it. We are seeing. I'm going to hand over to the board to respond to the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Daddy. I mean, this question of the CEO being sick and everything, nobody decides to be sick. And we are not going to be playing games in terms of making people sick. It's genuinely not well.
That was not the question. Did we ask him to tone down his letter of resignation?
No, I'm going there, guys. Hang on. Mr. Jarana tenders his resignation. Time elapsed. I'm sure he applied his mind to the whole situation. He tendered his resignation. Time elapsed after the board has asked him if he could consider not going. And then time elapsed and he comes to a position that he's entitled to. And then he gets sick in the process. He's not playing games. We have no time for that. Mr. Jarana made up his mind. The board did not like that, but this is life. Nobody forces anybody. Nobody. Mr. Jarana, I want to reiterate this. He was not, I'm going to use the word, pushed out of SAA. And I've said quite a number of times that the board enjoyed working with Jarana. The board actually appreciated the energy that was put in by Jarana, the long hours. If you were to ask me, I've never come across a person who works this hard and who really had the kind of commitment that Mr. Jarana had on his job. It is really indeed a pity that he decided to leave. And I want to leave it at that.
All right, let me talk about the turnaround strategy and the issues that are confronting the company and the board in that regard. There are 6 areas I want to cover quickly. One is the routes we operate. The second is the planes we fly. The third is the way in which we manage our costs, including procurement. The fourth is the organizational structure of the airline. The fifth is that we have a balance sheet that is fit for purpose to support that strategy. You can't implement the long-term turnaround strategy without addressing all 5. There is a 6th. I'm going to start with the 6th. That's addressing corruption and malfeasance. Absolutely. Corruption and malfeasance has been a fundamental tax on the airline and the company, and I have to say its employees and stakeholders over many years, and it has not been appropriately addressed. By the way, I consider leaks to be just another manifestation of malfeasance. It's part of a cultural problem that we as a board are determined to address and root out. The board has formed a subcommittee that is going back in time to address all issues of corruption and malfeasance and bring wrongdoers to book to the extent they haven't already been identified and prosecuted accordingly. To put in place appropriate systems so that we can mitigate the risk of there being a recurrence. But we shouldn't minimize the impact that it has had and continues to have, not only on the profitability, but on the operability of the airline, including subsidiaries such as SAA is well known. On the routes that we operate, we have already fundamentally changed a number of the routes. They're in the public domain. The most recent one was the announcement to go to Guangzhou, as opposed to going only to Hong Kong. We're already beginning to see the benefits of those flow through. On the metal that we fly, similarly, we have already made some decisions, and there are further decisions in front of the board and the shareholder in terms of optimizing the fleet for the routes that we will fly in the environment in which we are operating. Which brings me to procurement and the cost structure. Our costs are unacceptably high. I'm not talking about labor costs, I'm talking about our entire cost base is unacceptably high. Partly because the procurement procedures are inappropriate and not fit for purpose. That's one of the issues that has been discussed and is being reviewed between the company and the shareholder. Didn't start a week ago. We've been having an ongoing dialogue about how we can create greater efficiency in decision making to optimize our procurement of goods and of services. The other side of that coin, of course, is the organizational structure. Again, it is well known that we are going through an organizational design which is going to ensure that we have the right structure organizationally to support the airline going forwards. As Thandeka has said, we are already beginning to fill some of the critical posts. She's talked about the appointment of the chief executive of SAA Technical. It's taken much longer than the board would have liked, partly because previous candidates actually decided to go elsewhere. We've made an offer, as she has indicated, for the position of the CEO of Mango. We're close to finalizing offers for the chief commercial officer. There are a number of key positions that have already been filled and will continue to be filled. We regret the fact that the chief executive has resigned, but we will replace him with an appropriately qualified successor. And the last point, which I think I've already talked about, and I'm not going to labor it, is we cannot continue if we are burdened with inappropriate levels of debt. We need to be appropriately capitalized, and that means there will need to be an injection by the shareholder. The shareholder is acutely aware of it, but they have many demands on a limited purse, as we are all aware of. A number of you have asked questions about strategic equity partners. As a board, we have no ideological view on whether we should or shouldn't have a partner, be it an equity partner or not. Where we don't have the skills and others can bring it to us, we will motivate that to the shareholder. If it involves selling equity or potentially procuring somebody who will inject equity, the same applies. Under the PFMA, we are obliged to do that in lockstep, as I said previously, with the shareholder, and that process is ongoing. But we don't object to it. We need to understand, finally, that there's nobody who's going to invest in any of these assets unless they are perceived to be profitable or capable of being turned to profitability. The current challenges facing the board need to be addressed by the board. They will not be addressed by an incoming shareholder. Their view will be if the board and the current shareholder are not capable of dealing with them, then no incoming equity partner with a minority stake will be able to do so. I think that's been our experience, not just in South Africa, but around the rest of the world. On the issue of the investigation by the Free Market Foundation, I think I had already answered that, which is we will make available whatever information can be made available to all third parties, and in the context of our finances, they are publicly available documents. We're in the process, as Mr. Musa has said, of preparing our current and prior year reports and accounts based upon addressing the question of going concern.
Thanks, Governor. I just want to re-emphasize the point that was made by Bob Magwaza. The CEO was not requested or asked or implored to tone down his letter of resignation. As Bob Magwaza said, we received it, we were shocked, and we applied our minds, we accepted his resignation. Regarding a SATAU strike that happened in 2015 or 2014, that SATAU has not brought that to our mind or to our awareness. And as we sit here as a board, we are not aware that there is any unfinished business with respect to Zooks, whether in terms of her competence or disciplinaries or whatever else. As I said, we interacted with the unions this morning. SATAW was there, and they did not raise anything in terms of Zux's suitability. And again, as we know, the union space, labor will raise issues. They may or may not go on strike where they feel strongly about issues, but it does not mean that the board must only take the one view from one union. The board has to apply its mind to that, yeah. Acting positions, I think that has been responded to. Martin, there was the question about whether SAA will go into
I think I've answered
administration. Okay, all right. Okay, thanks. Okay, so there was a question, Babmak, was around cutting of heads. As Martin has indicated, that's not the only area where we look at. We look at the organization holistically. And if the reduction in staff numbers for efficiencies is a step that needs to be taken, then due processes need to be followed in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Any other concluding remarks before we have a photo opportunity with the acting CEO for Monday?
Yeah, maybe, Tlali, thank you very much for that opportunity. Just to say, once again, thank you very much to the media people in here. And as well, thank you very much for the robust interaction that we've had. We will take some of the questions and the issues you've raised, and we will think around them, and we will see where we land with them. But once again, you are part and parcel of our external stakeholders. Thank you very much for your input. By the way, Martin is reminding me of an obvious thing, that we are committed to regular updates so that we keep you posted as to what is happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to request board members to come closer to me, including the board members there and the acting CEO designate. Zux. Zux have full name as registered in the population register. It's Zukisa. Z-U-K-I-S-A. Zulu Uniform Kilo India Sierra Alpha. Here, just for the photo opportunity, Zux and members of the board.
Sure.
Just